Morning. This works. Okay, we're going to start on time out of respect to all of Freed's student and alumni who may be joining us from Asia, and this is already at night for them. So I'd like to first welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here this morning. I'm Tarek Raka. I'm director of the High Performance Building Lab, and having the pleasure to introduce the symposium for you. You will not see a lot of me today other than being in the audience, because we have the approach to this event is that it's going to be all about Freed's students and alumni. And so the engagement is going to be us as the High Performance Building Lab paying tribute to the legacy of Freed by engaging with you, yes, but giving the platform to all of Freed's alumni to be the speakers and engagers in general. So just a few notes in the beginning. The first thing is this event is sponsored by the School of Architecture, but organized by the IBPSA Georgia Tech newly found chapter. So all of the students you are seeing active here are all basically why we are all coming together in such an organized fashion. They have been wonderful to work with, and we will have a proper introduction for them, but I wanted to thank them first, because not just that the event would not happen the way it's happening, it actually is at a level of professionalism that sets a very high standard for events organized by students, so I'm very grateful for them and very excited to be working with them on this. But a note on the School of Architecture's support. The moment Scott learned, the chair, Scott Marble, learned that we're going to be organizing an event, there was tremendous support from faculty and staff. And I wanted to thank Scott and the school for the sponsorship with unlimited support, both from a logistics perspective, so staff members like Ezra was working with us, but also monetarily supporting this event as well, which has been great and phenomenal. So thank you for that as well. The second thing is the format of the event is that of us paying tribute. So all of the students who, we have some who have met Freed who were Ph.D. students here, but we also have students who have never met Freed. And they are very much aware of the legacy because they applied to Georgia Tech through that legacy, right? So we are going to be minimally present with the goal of letting everyone engage in conversation however they want. So the charge for the speakers was, please talk about where you are in the world right now, what you're working on, what you're excited to be discussing with the audience, both in person and virtually. But I'm pretty sure that this took a turn to be about Freed's impact on their lives in many different ways. So they will feel free to talk about whatever they want in a way that is honoring. And then from my part, as an introduction, is that it is a very challenging task. Paying tribute to someone who was as important in the field, but also an amazing personality. I've met Freed. There's no way I'm going to make give Freed justice, because everyone here has known Freed for, we're talking in the range of 20 years and things that I cannot even imagine. But I'm going to tell you just very briefly, one of the smartest people I've ever met, great sense of humor, wit, but also very sharp and very critical about the field. And so it is very challenging for us as a lab to live to that legacy. So we're going to be paying tribute by giving the platform to all of you who are here to honor Freed's legacy. And I'm pretty sure, other than introducing who's going to be giving tributes, this is probably the last you'll hear from me, and we'll leave it up to that. So now I'm going to ask two students to come and introduce some parts of the event. I'll ask Yasser Al-Masri, who is president of the IBPSA Georgia Tech chapter, to introduce the chapter. I'll ask Ayushi, who's the events chair, to talk about the program. And they will both represent the newly found IBPSA Georgia Tech experience. Let's start with Yasser first. And thank you, everyone.
Hello all, thank you for being here. This is a very personal event for us as the HPBL. I'm Yasser Al-Masri. I'm the president of the IBPSA Georgia Tech chapter. When we came up with the idea to start the IBPSA Georgia Tech chapter, this was really trying to live up to the pedigree of this great lab. When I was discussing it with Tariq, when the idea came up initially, there were only 2 other university chapters in the United States for IBPSA, and we wanted to be the third. The first on the East Coast, we wanted to be the third one that kind of just represents the entire East Coast, the Southeast, saying that, Georgia Tech and the legacy of the HPBL should definitely be up there. When we brought up the idea to IBPSA, they were very much excited about it. They were very supportive. They said yes, and we were able to form, as we said, only the third university-based chapter for IBPSA. This couldn't be done. This was really an effort that we all put in together. I really want to thank everyone that was there from the beginning. I'm just going to name them all. Eliana Panagulia that we have over here, Samantha Morton, Tanmay, Ranjita, Sahithi, Harshini, and Ayushi, which without them, this event couldn't be possible. We've put a lot of work into it, but really because we really believe in what the HPBL stands for and what Freed put into it. Dana and Tariq Sharif had the honor and opportunity to interface with Freed, even slightly at a time of transition in the lab. The first thing that struck me about him is, whenever you hear about a character as a giant in the field as Freed, you're always awestruck when you meet him up, and the humility that we met in there. A very humble person that was literally sitting there listening to our young ideas and all the crazy stuff that we had, giving very serious criticisms of it, as if taking the ideas seriously, putting us on the right track of how to think, how to go. I think that was definitely a defining moment in how I'm approaching my PhD now. And then through the HPBL and with Dr. Tariq always telling us that we have to live up to such a legacy and honor it by being the best of the best, hopefully in our field, is something that we're very passionate about. So we really put all our hearts and souls into this. Wanted to actually make this a success, honor Freed's legacy in some way, and build upon it. So in the IBPSA Georgia Tech chapter, we've really been working a lot this year. I need again to thank everyone that's been working with me. We've just wanted to disseminate all the great ideas and the values and foundations that this has been founded upon. So we've been really pushing the field of building science in the school. We started a building science club that we've been interfacing with the MArch students and the others with. It's been very successful because really a field that was built by these academic giants sometimes might be a bit alien to some of the students, but we're really just making people see the immense legacy that's there, the impact of what all this work's been done. We've also been working through a mentorship program. We're working with around 15 students, working with them, telling them more about this, making people understand the impact of what's all been done in the HPBL and building science as a whole. So it's really been such an honor to be working on this symposium. And I'll welcome all again, and I'm very looking forward to listen from all of you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ayushi, and I will take you very briefly through the program of the event. So as per the schedule, we will pay tribute to Professor Augenbroe. Post that, we will have a keynote lecture by Dr. Jason Brown. We will have a 10-minute short break after that at 9:30. We will have another virtual presentation by Dr. Alia. At 10, we will have a presentation by Mr. Patrick Chopson. At 10:20, we will start with Professor Yoon Jun Jung. At 10:40, we will have a short break for coffee and snacks. At 10:50, we will have another virtual presentation by Sandeep Ahuja. At 11:10, we will have another lecture by Sol Haroon. And at 11:30, we will have a lecture by Dr. Chelsu Park. At 12:15, we will start our break for 5 minutes, and it will be followed by our final keynote lecture by Dr. Peter Devilde. We will be there for lunch on the backside of the space at 1, and very happy to have you all here. Thank you.
While it appears that we have planned this to the minute, I'm 100% certain we will not adhere to this, just to make it very clear. We will do our best, but I don't think this will happen. And so what we're going to do now is have some tribute talks by people who have worked very closely with Fried in the School of Architecture. We will start by Chair of the Department, Scott Marble, then followed by Professor Russell Gentry, then virtually with Professor Michael Gamble, if he has joined us, and then finally by Professor John Poponis. But here's a key item of the entire day. We will not do any introductions for the speakers because we want the speakers to introduce themselves through the legacy of Fried. So I will not be doing introductions, but we will start with Scott.
Thank you, Tarek. And I'm just kind of intimidated by this crew over here. I feel like the whole thing is going to fall apart if they walk away. So just stay where you are. So I'm Scott Marble. I'm the chair of the School of Architecture. I arrived in 2015, and so I had several years of overlap with Fried, and I'm sure you're going to hear from a few faculty of their memories of Fried and their tribute to Fried. But I can assure you that that every faculty member in the school would echo what you're going to hear today, because he was really universally liked among faculty, which is near impossible among faculty. He was respected immensely, and one of the things that I think I've only recently sort of kind of realized is how important a faculty member like that is to the overall dynamic of a large faculty. He sets a standard for respect. He sets a standard for research. He sets a standard for just generosity, really, and that's contagious. It goes from faculty member to faculty member. So, in addition to his research legacy and to everything he's accomplished, on that part of his life, just his person, is also a legacy that is very, very deep in the school and has had a lasting impact, and it continues to today. Trying to think of a story. I mean, I had so many nice conversations with Fried when I first got here, and one again that I've only recently can kind of chuckle about. But when probably the first year I was here, I had one-on-ones with faculty just to get to know them. And when I had a conversation with Fried, I knew a little bit about his work, not as much as I did some of the other faculty, but I knew his reputation. And so when we would meet, I would try to engage research and talk about how much I understood what he was doing. And I just remember he was always like, yeah. And I could tell that he was just humbling me because I had no idea what I was talking about. And I tried to just sort of let him know that I understood what he was doing. I understood the importance of it, and I understood how much impact it had on the school. But he would never tell me, Scott, you don't really get it, but that's okay. But anyway, it was just kind of funny. I chuckle about that all the time because I think we had a lot of heated conversations because I would kind of, in some ways challenge what he was doing from my point of view, and he would entertain me. He would humble me. So anyway, I want to welcome Fried's family, Maria and Eki. It's great to see you here, and I know that he had his academic side and he had his personal side, but we're an extension of his family in a certain way. We're a different kind of family, and he meant a lot to us. And I guess the last thing I want to say, and others will probably talk about this, but as a university professor, one of the things that that is your greatest accomplishment is your students. And sorry, I get very emotional. And Fried's students, he was so committed to his students and so proud of his students. And he graduated 40 Ph.D. students, which is not easy to do. But there were many, many other students who he impacted. And you're going to hear from a lot of them today. And that's that's the true meaning. What's most meaningful, I think, to a faculty member are your students and what they do and what they do in the world. So anyway, Fried was amazing. We miss him, and yeah, I'll turn it over to the next person.
Russell Gentry. I know most of you. Eric wants me in the microphone, but virtual people. So I came to Georgia Tech in 1997, the same year as you. And, we both came kind of on a different mission. If you might remember at that time, we had a separate Ph.D. program from the School of Architecture. And Fried came, drawn by what I would call serious doctoral level scholars, such as my colleague John Paponis, Chuck Eastman, Ron Lukock, and came into this school with a serious intent of increasing our effectiveness in research, high performance buildings, and he did that. And I can remember the first few years of Fried's time here. We would meet in the Student Center and lunch, and Fried called that his Stammtisch, right? Peter may remember. What is the translation of this word in Dutch, Peter? And then? Yeah. So Fried had a little spot where, we would all kind of gather and he would hold forth. And it was a little lonely. I have to say, when Fried came here, he came into a faculty mostly of architects who didn't necessarily appreciate building performance or doctoral level research or Fried's sometimes grumpiness on the outside. And Fried did not like to come to faculty meetings. If you'll remember that the last thing that Fried wanted to do is sit through a bunch of meetings, meaningless meetings, and those of us who chair and call and sit through those meetings respected him for that because he got stuff done. He really chose what he wanted to work on, and I really appreciated his kind of struggle for the first 5 years of his professorship here in kind of trying to understand how research worked in the United States. And it was really amazing to see when the national labs, and the National Science Foundation, and other organizations in the United States who sponsor research started to recognize that he had a unique set of capabilities to bridge between what I would call just pure engineering simulation and what actually happens in buildings, much more dodgy and complicated and harder to characterize. He might have been one of the few people in the world who could be so mathematically true, but also recognize that simulations have their limits. And his book chapter on aspect systems, what I call aspect systems, I still assign to the building information and modeling students because it really is one of the few texts. Tarek is smiling here because I just assigned him to read it. But it's one of the few texts which really bridges the world between how we represent information and how people who simulate information try and give us results. I think I'll just echo what Scott said. The real impact of Fried's work is in the room today for those of you who were Fried students. I consider myself Fried students. And welcome today. I'm glad to be here.
we'd like to see if we can.
Hello. Hello. Professor Michael, can we hear you?
Yeah. Are you here?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, can I share my screen? I had a couple of pictures I'd like to share.
Please go ahead.
Okay, do I share screen? Okay, I'm going to share. Okay, can everyone see this?
Yes.
That is the man. I mean, that is the best picture of Fried Augenbroe. That's the way I will always remember him. And he's looking at an architect. So look at the grin on his face. He was always suspicious of architects. And I loved it. I loved it so much. We had the most joyful but deviant conversations about designers and scientists. So I wanted to, everybody knows the man's, he's out there. He touched on a lot of things. I wanted to touch on his joyous practicality because he was a joyful man, but he was really practical, and everyone who ever worked with him knows that. Now, Dutch biking comes to mind because Dutch biking, my first exposure to that was a visit to the Netherlands as a teenager. And I was absolutely surprised at how many people rode a bicycle. And I was also equally surprised at how much data there was about how many people rode a bicycle. Data to the point that it became ironic, sarcastic, etc. And I don't know where Dutch sarcasm comes from, but I think it's somehow related to biking. I was always attracted to Dutch biking and the frequency of travel and also the joy, the absolute joy that was made out of hitchhiking with someone. I'd never seen that until I was a teenager, that someone would ride side saddle on a bicycle. So I think that joyful practicality comes out of this Dutch culture of bikes. Fried may have hated bikes. I don't know. Also see the Netherlands as a mixer. And I always had this sensation with communicating with Fried that he was always trying to mix everything, trying to find the right idea and bring it into, the right educational recipe for whatever Ph.D. research was going on. The other thing that I just came to mind when I was asked to think more about Fried is this whole concept of empoldering. And empoldering is a form of reclamation. And it's just a beautiful engineering equation because you're empoldering new land essentially. So you're creating new land that has the capacity to grow and nourish and provide for a society. And it made me think of poldering and sort of this face-to-face problem-based learning that we do in architecture, where you really don't have there's nowhere to hide at a certain point. So this joyous practicality, I always like to think that there's something from the soil in the person that makes a difference in the way they shape the world. So I think this joyous practicality that Fried was so very generous to share with us over the course of the years is what I would like to leave you all with. And just, he knows I miss him terribly. And I was deeply moved at his funeral over his generosity to his children and nieces and nephews. That's something we should all aspire to. So thank you so much for allowing me these few minutes.
I normally improvise, as most of you know, but today you will allow me to read rather than improvise. It is difficult to remember the time before 1997 when building technology was a weak and unstable area of studies in the then interdisciplinary doctoral program of the College of Architecture, despite program intentions and priorities. One of our most recognized graduates from that time, Ali Malkawi, succeeded due to the extraordinary mentoring he received from Regents Professor John Templer, who had founded the PhD program. But he succeeded by taking courses from across, because we had nothing to offer in the College of Architecture and in the PhD program. Reed was hired in '97 by then PhD program director Gene Weinman and Dean Thomas Galloway after an international search. And the initial recommendation came indeed from Chuck Eastman, who was admiring the combined for computer models for the building industry in Europe, where Fried was setting foundations for standardized data so that one could more rigorously and more generalizably engage issues of building performance. The present national and international reputation of high-performance building studies at Georgia Tech is the most obvious legacy that Fried established between '97 and 2019 when he retired. Fried built the field step by step with firm, quiet, and unrelenting dedication and effort. He was motivated by love of the subject and a deep human bond with his students. He never self-aggrandized. He never once used vacuous rhetoric to self-promote. As Chaudhry, Park, and DeWild stated in the obituary in the Journal of Building Performance Simulation, students enumerate administrative bureaucracies and conformity, not quite his thing. At Georgia Tech, Fried developed a new subfield by introducing uncertainty and risk assessment in building performance modeling, and he established this as a new field nationally and internationally. At the same time, his work was used by major architectural practices like Perkins and Will. His doctorate students pursued careers in the top national labs and universities here and abroad. And he was one of the only two professors based in a College of Architecture, as we were still at the time, who was the principal investigator for an NSF EFRI seed program, the risk-conscious design and retrofit of buildings for low energy. I was the architect, OPI, and his team, and when the NSF asked that architects join a workshop to reflect on their contributions to the effort, I reported that my contribution was null. This was partly due to lack of data at the grain that would be required to test hypotheses that linked internal building morphology to energy performance. Our friendship was based on the respect we each had for the expertise of the other, our common sense that advances in each field require their own computational tools, and that while these had to communicate, not everything could or should become a sub-menu of a totalizing BIM platform. And of course, on our joint sense that there was something fundamentally good about the interdisciplinary core of our PhD program. As we developed the habit to go for dinner and beer at regular intervals, I got to know his cutting, almost anarchist sense of humor. Nothing was too sacred. I also got to recognize his deep humanist core that he barely disguised under the protective mask of the rationality of a stoic and on occasion even of a cynic. Sometimes I wrote letters of support for him. He responded to one such letter with a cartoon from the New Yorker. Two people engage in conversation at a party. One asks, "So what inspired you to study engineering, get married, find a job, move to the suburbs, have a couple of kids, and grow old?" I miss this irreverent and self-deprecating sense of humor, even as I inhabit a corridor which he once nicknamed the Cemetery of Intellectuals. As we remember Fried, I have this to say. Universities, at least good universities, have a soul. This is because at their birth, ideas, including scientific ideas, have faces and voices. They exist in dialogues, in friendships, and in relations of intimacy and trust, even though, if successful, they then go on to live in the third person. I think our graduate research programs had the soul, and Fried was a deeply ingrained part of it. That we are gathered here today bears testimony to the fact that we cannot be ourselves without remembering Fried. I look forward to two things. Here and now, to an exchange of ideas that would get him excited. This evening at home, to raising a glass of beer that would make him come up with a joke.
Morning, and thank you for having me here today. My name's Jason Brown. I was one of Fried's Ph.D. students, and I worked with him here for several years at Georgia Tech. I'm glad. I'm just very worried that I was going to get here at an awkward time. But thank you for having me here today. Because of a machine-made email reset, I didn't find out about Fried's passing for quite a while after it happened. And so I want to talk today a little bit and give him some tribute because I missed those past. So I don't have any slides, and I'm going to try something new from the humanities. I'm going to talk from a fully written out paper. I'm not used to doing that, so I don't have any slides to prompt me. It seems fitting that, Fried was a very thoughtful engineer and got me to break out of my too much of an engineerness. So I hope that this is in line with that. And I want to remember Fried by looking forward from his example and how he expanded my world and how he's still present in my life. I've had some really good teachers that I learned a lot from and who taught their subjects excellently, but Fried was really in a different category. Whatever subject he was teaching or discussing was kind of secondary to the real learning that happened that he could bring out just by his example and how he thought and how he could see things clearly that I missed. And much of that learning went on because of Fried was between the lines. The educational philosopher John Dewey wrote in his 1938 book, Experience in Education, perhaps the greatest of all pedagogical fallacies is the notion that the person learns only the particular thing he is studying at the time, or she. Collateral learning in the way of formation of enduring attitudes of likes and dislikes may be and often is much more important than the spelling lesson or the lesson in geography or history that is learned, for these attitudes are fundamentally what count in the future. Now, Dewey's not talking about far transfer, the idea that learning a skill in one area gives you skill can be transferred into another area. It's an appealing idea, but from what I gather, there's not a lot of support for it. Getting good at chess doesn't make you good at running a business or even playing Go, but it's not skills that Dewey's talking about, but attitudes and mental habits. And with Fried, you did get knowledge and skills, but you also got habits and attitudes. With him, the topic under study was a crop, but it wasn't the only crop. It was also the field on which another crop grew. You developed attitudes in you, and with Fried, there was a lot of collateral learning. One of the virtues that Fried brought out in his students was humility, and it came in two flavors. One of them was that kind of humility when you get when you're around somebody and you realize, wow, that person's pretty smart. The sort of humility you need to keep yourself from getting cocky. But that's not the only kind. There's another between the lines humility that he brought out, and it's one that's liberating. When I met Fried, I was perhaps typical sort of engineer, something of a splitter, but I also wanted to be a lumper, lazily seduced by detailed analyses and prizing accuracy and precision as the only route to understanding. There's a place for that sort of thing, where it is the right way to go. But with a lot of things, that place is not every place. Fried's emphasis on normative modeling and supportive decision-making showed this in its clarity of purpose. Economically supporting decisions, which is what is really needed. Representing reality in great detail and fidelity, it turns out, may not be needed and can be a distraction. Fried's persuasiveness on this was effortless, and I came around to his point of view. although it took longer than it should have because my identity was too tied to being the engineer. In getting me to change, Fried brought about the liberating humility of not taking yourself so seriously, allowing yourself to realize you may be wrong. I'm not a classicist, but I pretend to be one sometimes. I mean, someone who studies Greek and Roman antiquity. But this sort of collateral humility is what Ward Farnsworth, the dean of the University of Texas School of Law, makes out to be the greatest benefit of studying Plato's Socratic dialogues. Farnsworth writes on the outcome of Socratic questioning, the belief isn't so much a part of you. It had been talking through you, and now you were talking to it. Or now you hold your opinions rather than your opinions holding you. You can still hold them, just not with white knuckles. Farnsworth also notes that one needs an attitude of acceptance and good humor towards your own constant state of error. Such an attitude makes it easier for others to put up with us. It also makes finding the truth easier because you aren't so desperately attached to your own views. You get used to the idea not only of being wrong a lot, but being wrong more often than you think. And this sort of attitude was latent in my prior engineering education, but Fried was able to bring it out of the open. Some of my free time reading, I've returned to a topic that many have intersected, thermodynamics. Give a lecture on it. I'm going to stay between the lines. Not the packaged textbook thermodynamics with the problem sets, I'm not that strange, but the development of the field and the realization that we weren't seeing the world quite right. The stuff that's collateral to an engineering. I've seen a little bit of Fried in this. Thermodynamics has the rap of being one of the scarier topics, perhaps because some of the concepts are difficult to visualize and it resorts to hijacking, and Peter Atkins phrasing common words and then giving them sharper and more restricted meanings in order to describe concepts that are subtly but significantly different than the common understanding bound up in those common words, heat being the prime example. Turns out it's not what we thought it was. And perhaps it's true the way we label the world is how we see it, or even causes how we see and interact with it, but those labels are not necessarily how it really is. May or may not lead us astray, but it ought to give us pause. Reminds me of Fried's anecdote about how he used to have debates about when does a wall become a column when he was doing on some early work on building information modeling. But it took us humans a long time to need to understand thermo, only after we started building steam engines and we had some very curious and sharp people take a look at it. Before that, we got along fine, but we were wrong. I've been reading Sadie Carnot's 1824 paper, Reflections on the Motive Power of Fire, one of the foundational texts of thermodynamics. Besides being immediately applicable to steam engines or any heat engine, it led to a law of physics and new temperature scales. All students learn about this paper in the first month or two of introductory thermodynamics, but they only get the bullet points. It's a shame it's not included in full. It's actually a pretty good read. Textbooks would be improved if it were. But what reminds me of Fried is that Carnot was able to take a question, the most work possible to get out of a heat engine, and answer it using only the most essential features that bear on the question, taking them to their logical, inevitable conclusion. No need to consider if steam or alcohol vapor is the working fluid or the size of the condenser or the size of the levers or anything like that, because it turns out those details are not necessary to the question. So Carnot was still wrong about heat, but it doesn't matter what he was doing. But in seeing his argument take shape, it's impossible for me not to see Fried in it. The distillation of a problem to its essence, not getting distracted by details that are not germane, having a clear view of what's salient and what isn't. Wondrous seeing how natural this seemed to be for both, but for this reason it's also to see how both Carnot and Fried are central figures in their fields. And before learning from and working with Fried, there was only a little time spent on this economical thinking in engineering. There's dimensional analysis in engineering and feelings and the use of scaling arguments, so you can get a pretty clear and broad understanding of some physical process, the most basic and broadly salient premises. Time spent practice in these topics, and it really does take practice, there's an art to do it, was small compared to the time spent getting into the weeds. Getting into the weeds is necessary, but there's a danger. If you're not careful, which is embarrassingly common, as I know, getting comfortable with the details leads to the trap of thinking that every question can only be answered with the same approach. The trap I was in. Turns out working in the weeds, as hard as that can be, is easy compared to knowing when to stay out of them. Fried knew when he didn't need them, and he knew when he did. In his book, The End of Education, Neil Postman proposes a program of study he calls the Fallen Angel, focused on error and its correction. Eliminate textbooks since they present material in its perfected form, free from all the bumbling that went on to figure things out. Teach subjects historically from the source writings, revealing the errors in thinking and their eventual correction so that awareness of error is ever present, not just in others, but in yourself especially. Not being too tied to one idea ends up freeing your mind once you become comfortable with being wrong. Such a program makes collateral learning the main event, but this leaves little time for the skill building you need in the job. But in bringing a little of this into his teaching, Fried gave us a taste of what it seems a liberal arts education is for. It seems because I didn't have a liberal arts education, so I'm kind of guessing. You can take what I say with a grain of salt. But if the liberal arts is about freeing the mind, then Fried embedded the liberal arts in a STEM-based professional or vocational program of study, something I never had any other teacher do. Also, the acceptance and comfort with what you don't know seems pretty appropriate given Fried's emphasis on uncertainty and risk-taking. Now, in one of my last conversations with Fried, which may have been the last, it was an email exchange in which he mentioned he had begun volunteering with Sustainable Tucson, a local climate action group. Fried and I had spoken about climate change a few times before when I had mentioned it had become an increasing concern to me since I had learned something of its consequences, particularly the persistent nature of those consequences. Substance built up in the lithosphere over geologic time, released in an instant to the atmosphere, oceans, and biosphere, and returned to the lithosphere only over geologic time, all the while altering the Earth's energy balance. From what I glean, absent supercharging geochemistry or running combustion backwards, or geoengineering band-aids, climate change is irreversible at the timescales we humans operate within. I've read papers, and I'm not competent to judge how robust their findings are, but I've read papers that make the case that we may have hit the pause button on the next ice age. It would happen some 20,000 years from now if the Earth in orbit were left to itself. And the conditions for the ice age may not occur again for the next 50,000. Journalist Dan Zak noted a climate change. To grasp the problem, we have to slow down. To respond to it, we have to act fast. Slowing down is something that I've been doing a lot lately, staring into the abyss of time, as John Playfair put it. Only 20 long lifetimes, 20 people in sequence, separates us from the first Roman emperor or the middle of the Han dynasty. It's not really that long ago. Next to the first base at the junior high school field in, of all places, Gilbert, Minnesota, there's an outcrop of greenstone that started out as lava flowing out of the ocean floor just under 3 billion years ago, long before it was the middle of this continent. It was polished smooth and flat by the glaciers just the other day, and the little pillows formed when the lava met the sea are unmistakable. I stood on them. That was only a few seconds ago. As Stuart Brand put it, the present moment used to be the unimaginable future. We're not the center of time any more than we're the center of the universe. As Gary Snyder put it, this present moment lives on to become long ago. We do occupy a critical moment, causing a long problem in this instant that we may not be able to undo. We can choose not to make it any worse for anyone living in those 20, 50, or 100 long lifetimes from today who don't have a vote. But we have to do it in this instant, and Fried was working on it, even in his retirement. It's not easy. The causes and effects of climate change are spread out over time, and they're spread out over space. The agency to stop it likewise spread out over time and space. And with thanks to Fried, spread out over us here today and over us tomorrow, over the buildings you work on today and those buildings tomorrow, as long as they last, whether it's 2 or 20 lifetimes. Spread out all over the people who use those buildings now and in the future. And I'd like to think of those buildings a little like monuments, but not monuments made so our progeny remembers us, but so that we remember them. I'm really looking forward to seeing the rest of you.
Instead of having a Q&A, and because we are a little bit early, we'll take a break now so that we can all mingle rather than just move on with the program. So we'll restart the program in a bit, and we'll notify everyone virtually that we're on a break, and we can talk to Jason as well about his talk. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, Alia. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. So we just wanted to introduce you now.
Okay.
Alia, we're not doing formal introductions because we want everyone to introduce themselves through their
No.
talk. And
Sure.
please hang around for Q&A. The students will have a microphone to move around for you. You may not see the people asking the question, but if someone asks a question or have a comment. So everyone,
Sure.
we're about to start. And after each talk, there's a moment for Q&A. And also, if you have any comments in general to follow up, so the students will have a microphone for you after each speaker. And okay, Alia, you can take it. You can take it away.
Thank you. So I will let you know. Yeah, you can share it, and when I tell you next, you can go to the next slide. Okay. So if you share, I'll go ahead.
You can start now.
Okay. Are you sharing my slides? Because I'm not able to see that.
Next.
Yeah, now I can see it. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I would like to first thank you for putting this together. I really appreciate this gesture and efforts to bring us together to commemorate Professor Fried. And a very special thanks to Dr. Tariq Raha for this initiative. This really brings me back to our former BT lunch days. So my name is Ali Al Hashim. I'm currently an assistant professor at Sultan Qaboos University in Oman, and I titled my talk Your Yellow Path. So next. In case you don't know me, one thing that would help you understand me better is that I experience life through my notebooks because that is where I feel most safe and under control. I capture my daily life with simple notes and diagrams instead of taking pictures. Actually, even now I'm sitting here with my notebook. One notebook lasts me around 6 months, and I have known Professor Fried for a period of 10 wonderful notebooks. Preparing for this symposium gave me the chance to look through them again and relive my moments with Professor Fried. So thank you again for that. Next. I joined High Performance Building Program in 2015 and graduated in the beginning of 2020. I am from an architecture background, and in our first online application meeting, he started by saying this might not be the best program for you. And while he was talking, my entire family of 8 sisters, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, and cousins just casually entered the living room, interrupted my online meeting, and started chatting out loud. I was completely embarrassed. He tried hard to hold his laughter and just said, "Welcome aboard." And that's how I joined the program. I never found out if he originally planned on accepting me or not, and I still don't know that. Next. So during my PhD journey, I got engaged, married, and had a daughter just after my thesis defense. So Professor Fried has literally been there in all major events of my life, both on personal and academic levels. So I got engaged over the phone just 5 minutes before my meeting with Professor Fried. My wedding date got decided over a text during his building simulation class. I presented my advanced simulation project online just an hour before my wedding ceremony started. And I threw up in his office during my pregnancy morning sickness days. So yes, he witnessed it all. Next. This picture was of my first project presentation of building simulation course in 2015. Next. And this was of my last presentation in 2020. I changed drastically between the two pictures, both mentally and physically. As in the second picture, I was huge and 9 months pregnant. But what remained constant throughout the years is you in the front seat with your yellow notepad. Next. One of the things that remind me of Professor Fried is his yellow notepad. You always had this notepad with you. We talked and communicated through it. For me, universe was simpler in your yellow notepad and the world clearer. We discuss everything on this notepad, from complex simulation models to explaining random puzzles. Next. On this notepad, I got answers to my questions, my next steps, my roadmap. At the end of every session, when I collected these pages, you used to smile and say, "What will you do with this trash?" And I used to reply, "This is my yellow treasure." Next. I still remember that I used to take these papers at the end of our weekly meetings and sit all night translating them to my notebook so I don't miss out any point. And on that one day of the week, I would sleep like a baby as my path got clearer. Next. I used to plan my entire week based on our weekly breakfast meetings. Carefully choose what I will present, ask, and say, so I get full advantage of that 1 hour thesis discussion. I used to plan out what breakfast to bring for you because I knew you did not have time to eat before our meeting. Our meeting used to be the highlight of my entire week. Everything else revolved around it. Next. In this 1 hour session, you grilled me, questioned every step I took, every decision I made to make sure that I know what I'm doing. Next. And when time came to present my work, you would stand beside me. I personally love this picture because it sums up beautifully what I'm saying. You did not face me at the end of my presentation. Rather, you rotated your chair and faced the audience with me to assure me that we are in this together. And that gave me strength and confidence to stand up for my work. Next. Your lectures about building simulation were like well-orchestrated symphonies where you used to add one layer of tones after another. Next. You showed us the beauty of normalized simple models and art of asking the right questions. Next. I have never seen anyone break down an energy model in such a simple and effortless manner. This page has to be one of my favorites, where you explained entire EPC model in almost 30 minutes. Next. Going through your lecture notes, I still laugh out when you compared adding PD panel on a bad building to putting lipstick on a pig. Next. I reflect on the way you analyze knowledge tree when I asked you, why do we need to do simulation? Your lecture varied between fun take on the world to a deep understanding to what is going around us. You always made sure that we don't only gain technical knowledge, but also question everything we do. Next. I don't know how to explain this in words, so I will refer to one of the cartoon strips I made for you. Things somehow simply made sense when with your presence. You had a very interesting insight to things, and that always amazed me. Next. You have guided me in every way possible. Your yellow notepad papers are a testimony to that, and they acted as a lighthouse for me as I navigated through life. Next. Even when I stand up to present today, I remember you sitting in the front row with your yellow notepad and a pen writing down comments about every word I say and every graph I present. Professor Fried, I promise to keep your legacy alive through my thoughts, knowledge, and research. And I will always reserve that front row seat for you. Thank you. I try to keep it short because I know we might be falling behind schedule.
Alia, you won't be able to see me. This is Tariq, but
No problem.
I have had the privilege to be present in your committee, and towards the end, I just wanted to note, I of course don't have a question. What kind of question am I going to ask? But I just want to note that I did not see the world you saw until you presented it that way. It was phenomenal to see it. Like the depiction you had of the comic is such a wonderful way to represent things. And if you have any reflections on how that wisdom was present in your life, we're all ears. But otherwise, very touching presentation. Thank you.
Nice to hear from you, Dr. Tariq Raha. When I came to this program, I wasn't calm like this, to be honest. I was fidgety, and I just wanted to get things done. After I met Professor Fried, he taught me to, sit back, relax, and kind of do the right thing at the right moment, and and direct my effort in that way. So he completely changed me as a person, to be honest. And he always used to look at my notebook and used to say, where did you get that? I said, you said it. He said, oh, okay. So I always felt fascinated that he would say things and he would pretend that he did. It's something that that's beautiful in my notebook, and he didn't say it. So I really loved those years. And when I went through my notebooks, all the sarcastic comments and everything was there because I used to, note everything. So I'm glad I did, because it helped me to relive all these moments. So yeah. I know people who didn't attend the building simulation course with me might feel that what is this in these pages, but that's how he conducted his lectures. So I would just go behind him as fast as possible with all my colors, so I'm in track with them.
Hi, Alia. This is Yasser. I don't think you can see me as well. I just wanted to ask you, now that you're a professor at, I think, Sultan Qaboos University in Oman, how do you see yourself as a professor? Where do you see Fried in your conduct as you kind of, go ahead and now you're in a chair where, you're a professor? How do you see that influence you with your own students?
Okay. Hi, Yasser. Long time no see. Nice to hear from you. To be honest, the way that Professor Fried heard from us, the humble way that he heard from us, that really affected me. That kind of affected the way that I listen to students, to the way I listen to younger people who are just fresh off in this field. So that really changed me. The way that I knew, most of the time I used to say like rubbish things that didn't make sense to him, but he listened to me, and he used to structure that out and explain to me, maybe we don't do this way. How about we try it this way? So that respect that he gave to your opinion, to your voice, is something that I will keep with me, I think, forever.
Okay, Alia, we will move to the next presenter. Thank
Sure.
you so much, and
Thank
stay
you.
with us. And we figured
I'll
out the
be back.
cameras, so now whenever someone is speaking, they will also be able to see it. All right, Alia, see you.
Okay, great. Thanks.
produce a result. I'm not sure if it was accurate, but Fried's like, you're going to pass this class. So, but from that, I learned that it's possible to break down a problem into its component parts to make a simulation that works and things like that. So I just kind of want to put that out there, that all the success that I feel like I've had today really stems from this time, and also from Jason Brown, who's here as well. So, you can't really talk about the program from when I was here without having to mention that Jason was a really instrumental part of really breaking down the problem and challenging me as well. But I feel like kind of two sides of the same coin when they're here. So I think just want to make sure that we also recognize that Fried put together a great team that was also teaching as well. So kind of with that in mind, so if you don't know what CoveTool is a building performance simulation software. It's web-based. And we've been able, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about how we took a lot of Fried's thinking and put it into this software. But basically this CoveTool is used around the world in 122 different countries. We have 15,000 users around the world who are using reduced order energy models. It's got the ISO model EPC built into the back end as well for doing quick energy models, things like that. And it's really exciting is that now his work and the work of all the researchers and PhD students that have worked on the energy performance calculator and those ideas of reduced energy modeling are now being used in almost every firm in the world. We have 25,000 projects that have been modeled in the software over the last year. And we offset enough 5x more carbon than Tesla last year if all those projects get built. So, Fried's ideas and the ideas of everyone in the building performance program are really moving ahead and moving into a much broader audience of architects, engineers, contractors, things like that. So I'll kind of move through these things a little quickly, but this is also some slides that actually come from our pitch deck. We recently raised a $30 million round. Sandeep actually led the efforts to raise that, but in total for CoveTool, we've raised $36.5 million from venture capital to build this. So just want to put that out there that like now, everything climate tech related, the really big investors around the world, like I was talking to the CTO of Facebook a couple months ago at a meeting with people who've invested in us. So there's big interest from folks. JLL's hiring like 1,000 sustainability professionals. It's happening. And one of the things that's really interesting is like there's a huge billions, $268 billion, whatever, of lost productivity every year. These are the main factors that are affecting how that value is being lost. So we can see that sustainability is now a primary concern for almost everyone, and building simulation and energy modeling are a part of that. So when I think about like the job prospects of many of our folks who are in the program, I want to kind of like focus, we've talked a lot today about like what Fried has done, but I just think it's really cool that his ideas live on. And also too, what is the measure of someone's value to the world? I think it really comes down to, did you care about other people in your life? Definitely did that. And, I just kind of want to infuse that as I kind of talk about these things as well. But, 50% of all buildings are going to be built between now and 2050. And so that means that the work that was started then, that you all are working on now, that everyone in the programs and who's graduated, we have a lot of work to do. There's a lot of opportunities for us all. So I'm just really excited about that. And then I look across the landscape, and while Fried may have been interested in energy modeling, and many of us have been, these are all the different types of software that, and this is just a small sample of all the software types that are used by all the different professions to pull a project together. And we can see that almost none of these tools, if you look closely and you recognize some of the logos up there, almost none of them communicate well with each other. So it comes down to, how do you create data models? How do you reduce the complexity? And how do you pick problems in such a way that you're not like spending an infinite amount of years in time trying to build tools and software that might take, yes, you can make something perfect, but maybe only perfection comes from God, but maybe, we can get 80% of the way there. It's something that I think that we're always looking at that. And I think that idea of not mixing, Fried used to say, don't mix the chocolate with the vanilla when you're trying to solve a problem, and really focus what is the core problem. And so for us, what we've really been focusing on is like, where are the gaps? And for us, it's a data problem. So the sustainability and carbon problem the energy modeling problem. These things are all really at their core a data problem. And so when we think about like all the different ways that data is not being transferred properly, most of the time people are using email and meetings and things like that to transfer information from one participant, whether that's the architect or the engineer, owner. And then anytime there's like a break in that process, in that web of complex things, then we end up with like a situation where, you know, information is lost. And so kind of like thinking about how that information, how we can make sure that people make better decisions. One of the things that we always used to talk about, at least here at Georgia Tech, was this idea of, you know, what would be, how much effort should it take something like, you know, for 30% of the time it would take to do something, oftentimes you can get to 90% accuracy. And I think that's something that I really internalized from Fried, is this idea that, you know, we don't have to get all the way there in 100% accuracy to know what the right decision is. I mean, even the climate model for the original climate model back in the 1960s was accurate. It still predicted that 420 parts per million of carbon would be in the atmosphere by 2020, and here we are today, and it's exactly that. So even with all the Baroque, adding all the little computational pieces to it, it still is, you know, accurate. So I think like always understanding that anytime you make a simulation, it's to make a decision. And I think like that idea is so infused into everything I do today, and something that I also try to teach people that work for me as well. But I know it's something that like many of you all have also been thinking about ever since you've probably talked to Fried. That was probably the first thing that he said was, you know, what's the purpose of an energy model? It's to make a decision. It's not to predict the future. And so that can be true of any tool. And so if we think about like all those data losses as well, so we've been thinking about them. We've been building different pieces. We've been thinking about each stage of the design process. What is the correct amount of information? And then reducing all these like jaggedy data losses as well by using that same methodology and applying it to daylight modeling, to energy modeling, to flare simulations, to, you know, optimization using cost versus energy, thinking about like the speed and the time at which it takes to run the simulation is also like a really important part of, if it takes too long, it doesn't affect your decision making, so therefore you shouldn't do it. Is kind of the thing that, again, coming back to those ideas that we picked up from here, which I think is really cool. And then kind of like how we've decided to fix it is to create like a virtuous cycle between playing the stuff, designing something, and then how we build it, and creating an ecosystem of apps, because we all know that in building simulations, there's a lot of specialized tools that were designed for researchers. So everything that we've been doing is designed for the general, least skilled architect or engineer, and trying to make sure that everything works well for them so that they can make those decisions, and we can affect a huge market of people who are all trying to do the right thing, but maybe don't have the capabilities that you all might have, or I might have, in terms of being able to run a detailed model and understand the inputs, applying automation at every point, kind of that idea that all input is error. We need to focus on like reducing the uncertainty in the model and kind of like closing that hurricane plot of problems, you know, to making sure that we're like making good decisions. So I'll kind of like show you guys just a couple of quick kind of screenshots of our current products that are out there in the marketplace that hopefully millions of people are going to use. But right now, thousands of people, like I mentioned, we got 15,000 architects and engineers using this. So this is actually like, we do all the solar, you know, COVID stuff. We got daylight modeling. We have the fastest daylight simulation method in the world that I wrote from scratch with my brother, Daniel, who's also our co-founder. And we actually applied reduced order thinking to build that daylight simulation. We thought about how do we take each equation, break it down, and then maybe pre-simulate certain pieces of it, like where the sun positions are in the sky, break it into separate servers using AWS and the power of the cloud, be able to run more models. So those are things that we've actually been able to kind of pull those things together. And again, just applying those lessons that we learned from Fried, putting it into daylight modeling as well, I think has been something that's been very gratifying to me as well. And, you know, and then just going on to all the different parts that